If you have your Bibles, will you turn with me to Acts chapter 10? We're continuing. That's where we'll be at. The book of Acts, until the Lord leads us somewhere else. We're going through the book of Acts. I kind of got, in my life, in Clayton's life, I kind of got stuck here in chapter 10. I just can't hardly seem to get my way out of it. Simon Peter, what the Lord's doing in Simon Peter's life. We're going to look this morning starting with verse 24, but let me just remind you of where we're at in the story. The first part of Acts chapter 10, we met Sergeant Cornelius. He was a centurion, a sergeant over about 100 men up in Caesarea Maritima. I think I have that map here. Up there in Caesarea, and he was a good man. And he was calling out to God and praying out to God, and we see that the Lord heard his prayer. Well, in the meantime, and so the Lord told Cornelius, the angel told Cornelius, send somebody down to Joppa and you'll find this guy named Simon Peter. Well, meanwhile, in Simon Peter's life, he's sitting out on the roof one day waiting for lunch to get prepared, looking out over the Mediterranean, and he has this vision of these animals, and God says to him, Simon Peter, don't call unclean that which I've called clean. And I want you to get up and I want you to go without a doubt. He had no idea what was happening up in Caesarea. He had no idea what was going on. But God said to him, whenever somebody comes to get you, whoever that is, take off and go without a doubt. When these foreigners come to get you, go without a doubt. So we find ourselves, verse 23, Peter invited those guys in. So they came in, they came down and said, here's why we're here. We're here from Caesarea. And Sergeant Cornelius told us to come down here. We'd find you here at the house of a man named Simon, a leather tanner by the sea, and boom, here you are. And so Peter invited him in. It had been about a day and a half journey to get there. The next day he got up and set out with him, and some of the brothers from Joppa went with him. And I wondered what the conversation was like as they made the journey up along the seacoast from Joppa up to Caesarea. That day and a half journey, I think it was about a 30-mile journey. It was like from walking from here to Greenville, or the other side of Greenville. You can get there in about 25 minutes unless you're walking there. It apparently takes a day and a half. And so they walked. I wonder what the conversation was. I wonder if Simon Peter was talking their ears off. For those of you guys that went through us the Harmony of the Gospels, as we studied the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, one thing that stood out unmistakably was that Simon Peter was not short on words. He said pretty much what he wanted, when he wanted. It didn't matter who was standing there. He stuck his foot in his mouth over and over. And here he's got a day and a half journey with these 3 men from Cornelius' house and some other guys that went with him. What was that conversation like? I wonder if he talked their ears off, or if he was staring out at the Mediterranean Sea thinking, I wish I was going fishing right now. I don't know where I'm headed to, but I bet you I'd rather be going fishing right now. Whether he was talking or not, I'm certain he was at least thinking about the events that had happened in his life on top of that roof the last couple of days. About how God had moved him once again from where he was to where God wanted to take him to in the next step of his journey. The journey was apparently a day and a half. We saw the map. That brings us to where we're at today, verse 24. The following day he entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. Peter didn't know it, but he was about to walk in on the first ever Gentile, non-Jewish, 2:47 a.m. home group. Except it was about 3 in the afternoon, so this was really a 2:47 p.m. home group that he was about to walk in on. He had no idea. This first home group, unbeknownst to him, Sergeant Cornelius, gives us, I believe, the most effective model for growing a church. This man, Simon Peter, who was a man of influence, and he had some people in his life, in his little circle of influence, and you know what he did? He just invited them to come to his home. And he was going to have some fellow to come and talk to them about whatever God had put on his heart. I believe that's the most effective model for a church growing, is doing exactly what Sergeant Cornelius gave. This is the first story that we really have of a non-Jewish family, couple, city situation, a non-Jewish situation in the Bible where we now have some Gentiles who get together in the New Testament. New Testament's after Jesus died on the cross. In the New Testament, this is the first real story of where we have a bunch of Gentile people getting together. By the way, if you're here today and you're a Gentile, raise your hand. That's everybody. If you're not a Jew, that's all of the rest of us. The first picture of us non-Jewish people getting together, they got together in a home led by this man who had just a little bit of influence. He just invited some folks in his circle of influence. Hey, come on to the house. I've got a guy that's going to come and speak. They entered Caesarea, and then verse 25 says, when Peter entered, Cornelius met him, fell at his feet, and worshipped him. You remember that Sergeant Cornelius sent 3 men, 2 of his household slaves, and another devout soldier down to Joppa, down there to find Simon Peter. 3 guys, and they came back up. And it says that the word entered here gets the idea that I don't know if they went into the complex where Sergeant Cornelius lived, or they entered the foyer, but we'll see in just a minute that they went on in further. So they entered the outer something or other, the foyer or front yard or something, but when they got there, look at what happened. He must have been looking out the window, Sergeant Cornelius, looking for the return of his men, including the arrival of some guy, some man that God had told him to ask for, this Simon Peter fella. Now imagine those 2 slaves and that soldier were dumbfounded when they saw their sergeant, their master, their boss man walk out the door and get down on his knees and bow down to this Simon Peter guy and worship him. These men had always seen Sergeant Cornelius. He was up here. He was the one that was giving instructions and commanding people where to go and demanding respect of other people. They could never have imagined in their lives that this sergeant would now be down on his knees, bowing and worshiping to some man of God that was a Jew. They couldn't picture that. What is he doing? What is he doing? Sergeant Cornelius, have you lost your mind? You need to get up. Now here he was on the ground before some Jewish man who was under his jurisdiction. I wonder what Peter thought. Can somebody get a picture of this so I can show my wife? Can somebody take a selfie of this real quick and show how it's supposed to be? Simon Peter thought. I imagine he was thinking, I'm shaking my head. I never thought I'd see this day. I've been in the ministry for a long time. I'm pastor of a large church. I didn't see this one coming. I didn't see this happening. This Roman soldier at my feet. I didn't see that. I imagine he would have tempted to at that moment to feel like a movie star. Here he was, all the people were watching around, and he showed up, and Sergeant Cornelius was there on his knees in front of him. He was probably tempted to feel very special if it weren't for the reality of his own personal failure. I wonder if he thought about that night around the campfire when he had denied his master, the one he was now here representing. Just about the time he was ready to gloat in this moment, through his mind he probably heard the sound of the cock crowing, and he thought, oh yeah, I've blown it. And so what does he do? He reaches down, and he the Bible says, I think it's the next verse, verse 26, but Peter helped him up. Peter reached down and grabbed his hand. Sergeant, sir, stand up, sir. Stand up, sir, because I myself am just a man. And I wondered if those guys who were standing there, if time stood still and they watched and they saw. This man, Sergeant Cornelius, who they had known, given directions all of his life, and he was always in charge and always telling people what to do, and he was in charge of the Jews here in his jurisdiction. And now he found himself eye to eye, toe to toe. And here was this man, Simon Peter, who God had blessed and exalted and raised up and used in a tremendous way, and he was God's man for the hour. But on this moment, he was eye to eye, he was toe to toe with Sergeant Cornelius. On this day, these folks saw that these 2 men were standing on level ground. Imagine that Cornelius, when he lifted him up and helped him up, and he said, I'm just a man myself, Cornelius wrapped his big, strong military arm around him and motioned for the other guys, come on in. So verse 27 says, while talking with him, he went on in. He entered somewhere earlier, and now he went on in the house. And when he got there, he found that many had come together there. It sounds as though Simon Peter was very, very surprised to realize the size of the group of people that assembled. He had to have been shaking his head. I didn't see this one coming. I didn't figure I was going to get here and find a room full of people. Peter had preached to tens and hundreds and thousands and multiple thousands of people. And he had walked and people had been healed in his shadow. And God used him in a tremendous way. But Simon Peter had never stood in a room full of heathen, uncircumcised Gentiles. I love how, what's Peter going to say? Peter is so far out of his little box. He is so far out of his comfort zone, probably thinking, man, I sure would like to be by the Sea of Galilee fishing. I'm so far out of my box, I have no idea. I couldn't have imagined this place. I couldn't have prepared for this moment. I have no idea. I just look how candidly he starts his words in verse 28. Peter said to them, you know it's forbidden for a Jewish man to associate with a visitor, to associate or visit with a foreigner. God has shown me that I must not call any person common or unclean. Y'all know I ain't supposed to be here. You know what the other apostles would say if they knew I were here today in this household full of you heathen, depraved Gentiles. You know what the other guys would say. You know my comfort zone has just been stretched to a very uncomfortable place. I sure would like to be fishing by the Sea of Galilee. I'm breaking every rule in the book right now. But you see, God has been working in my heart. He is moving me to the next place in my journey. You see, I didn't know I was coming here today to Sergeant Cornelius' home to find a room full of unclean people. People that I've known as unclean all my life. People who were completely different from me. But the words come through my head that the Lord spoke to me on the roof a couple days ago. Call it clean. If I've called it clean, don't you call it unclean. So verse 25, he said, that's the reason I showed up without any objection when I was sent for. So I asked you, why did you send for me? Man, I just love that. In this work that God is doing in my life, moving me to the next place in my journey, using me to help people move from where they are to where God wants them to be. Can you tell me, Mr. Cornelius? Can you tell me where you're at in your journey? We studied Peter. We know that he wasn't likely very often to stop and to listen to where people were at. He was liable to just blurt out and say whatever was on his heart. But in this moment with what God was doing, there was somebody he was about to minister to that was very, very different from him. He could not understand their perspective. He did not understand their world. He did not understand their culture. And he said to him, can you please give me some context, Mr. Cornelius? Can you tell me why you called me here? Can you tell me what the Lord is doing in your life? Can you share with me? And I want to help you and I want to minister to you and I want to share with you the amazing gospel of Jesus Christ. But I just don't know where you're coming from. Your people are different from my people. Can you just take a minute and tell me, why did you send for me here? Man, I love that. If we talk about helping people move from where they are to where God wants them to be, that means I've got to get to where they are. Can you tell me, Sergeant Cornelius, why did you call me here? This is all new for me. Verse 30, Cornelius replied, and he repeats and retells the story that happened 4 days ago. Verse 30, 4 days ago at this same hour, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was praying here at the house. And just then a man in a dazzling robe stood before me. And this is exactly what we studied about 3 weeks ago. He said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard and your acts of charity have been remembered in God's sight. And so send somebody down to Joppa and invite Simon here, who is also named Peter. He's lodging at Simon, the tanner's house by the sea. Therefore, Mr. Simon Peter, apostle, sir, whoever you are, sir, I don't know, you've never met you. God just told me to send for you. So I sent for you immediately. And you did the right thing in coming. So here we are, a room full of people. Here we are, listening and ready to hear everything that you've been commanded by the Lord. Peter had to have been shaking his head. He didn't see this one coming. in all of his growing up in synagogue school, in all of his traveling with Jesus for 3.5 years throughout his ministry, in all of his ministry as the pastor of a mega church, he couldn't see the day coming when he would be the one to be asked to be standing in a house full of Gentiles. A house full of people whom he had long regarded as unclean, who were hungry and thirsty for righteousness. You people, you unclean, heathen Gentiles, you people are here. You've gathered here for the purpose of hearing what I have to share. I didn't see that coming when I left Joppa. Can I pause for a moment and ask you, can you think of a person that is in your sphere of influence that perhaps you have looked at with disdain and imagined in your head that there's no way on earth that that person could ever hunger after God? If not, thank you for listening silently while I talk to myself. Here we are, ready to hear God's message. I wonder if in that moment Peter was reminded of the words of Jesus back in his ministry. Look, the fields are white, ready for harvest. There's people everywhere. Look around you. There's people everywhere that are ready for harvest. Here you are in a room full of those people. No, they don't look like you and act like you and dress like you and go to the places you go and say the things you say and do the things you do. But look, the fields are white. There's people everywhere. Because see, I'm doing my work everywhere. Yes, Lord, I know that the fields are white into harvest, but not these people. This is not the folks I thought you would give me to minister to. I liked it back where I was the pastor of the mega church in Jerusalem when things were going great. Can I go back there? Not these people. Shaking his head, Peter slowly began to speak. What's he going to say? Verse 34, this was the title of the message. Simon Peter on the move. Now I understand. Now, verse 34, Peter began to speak. Now I really understand that God doesn't show favoritism. I've been doing this thing for a long time. I thought I understood. I thought my theology was straight as an arrow. I thought I had it figured out. I thought the way that we did things at church was exactly right. I thought that my people, I thought that everybody ought to join the church and do it like I'm doing it because I had it right. But before I speak to you all today, can I just stop and confess to you that what's happening in this room today here in your house, Sergeant Cornelius, what's happening to what's happening in this house, first of all, is for me. For the first time in my life, now I really understand. God doesn't show favoritism. Remember our verse from the Becoming Healthy series? Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Go after wisdom, and when you get it, hold on to understanding. Simon Peter had been in church, synagogue, school since he was a little kid, no doubt. His parents took him there. He was in church and synagogue for all those years, and then Jesus called him to be his follower, and he followed him for 3.5 years, and he was there the night that Jesus was crucified, or the night of the trial, and he denied him, and then on Sunday he was resurrected, and he showed up, and he restored Jesus, and he told Jesus, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. You're the person that I'm going to raise up and use. But now, for the first time in my life, I don't know how old Peter was, 40, 50 at this point in time. I don't know how old he was. I don't know when his spiritual journey started. I don't know how many steps that he had made in his spiritual journey. I know that he dropped down. I know he fell off. We know that he rejected the Lord. He'd been at this thing for a very, very long time. And on this day, in this room full of people in Sergeant Cornelius' house with a bunch of Gentile heathen people, he said, now I really understand. I've been moved to the next place in my spiritual journey. What was the epiphany for Peter? Number one, that God doesn't show favoritism. Number two, verse 35, instead, in every nation, the person who fears him and does righteousness, those two things, is acceptable to him. I'm not sure I did get the rest of that verse on there. In every nation, the person who fears him and does righteousness is acceptable to him. You know, that was the angel's testimony about Cornelius. Hey, Cornelius, your prayers have been heard and your acts of charity have been remembered. You remember when we went through the Ecclesiastes study, the very, very last chapter, all of the stuff about vanity of vanities and getting wisdom and all of the good things. Remember how Solomon ended the book of Ecclesiastes with this verse, Ecclesiastes 12. Verse 13. When everything has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep His commandments. Because that is the whole duty of man. That is for all humanity. You want a magic formula for judging how you're doing before a holy God? Clayton, number one, do you fear God in your life? And I've talked about that a bunch. I believe in America what we need to do if we want an immediate short-term help fix for America, number one, we need to fear God. We need to go back to the place where I'm a little bit afraid of God. I don't want to do this behavior because I'm just a little bit afraid of the judgment of God. Fear God and do that which was right. Hey, what if that's all I do in my whole life? I spend my whole life and I only do those two things, fear God and keep His commandments. Now I see and understand, Peter said. It hits me. Now I understand. I realize that if any person, anywhere in any nation, fears Him and does righteousness, that's acceptable to God. I thought you had to be a Jew. I thought you had to be circumcised. I thought you had to be a part of this denomination, that denomination. I thought you had to be baptized this way or that way. I thought you had to have this theological view. But now I really understand. This is an epiphany for me in my life. I understand the person who fears Him and does righteousness is acceptable in His sight. That's different for me. That takes me way outside of the comfort zone of my little theological box. That busts and it explodes the traditions that I've held on to for so long in my life. I realize that if any man in any country, of any denomination, of any political affiliation, if any man fears God and does that which is right, it's acceptable to God. That's new and different for me, because that's not how I've been doing it the last 50 years of my life. Now I really understand. Can I pause and just let that soak in? Those two, that verse again. In every nation, the person who fears Him and does righteousness is acceptable to Him. Then verse 36, Peter probably stammers and tries to start telling the next part of the story after he's just confessed to these folks. Thank you for inviting me, Sergeant Cornelius, to this home. Thank you for meeting with me here today. Thank you. I'm just shaking a little bit. This is brand new for me. Thank you for letting me confess to you that now I understand what God is doing in somebody else's life. And then he starts to tell the message of the gospel. You see, here was the problem I've understood. I've always understood it, that he sent the message to the Israelites. That's me, Simon Peter. I'm an Israelite. I'm a Jew. We were the conduit. We were the piping through which God was going to bring His Messiah. He sent the message to the Israelites proclaiming the good news of peace through Jesus Christ. And I understood that I'm a Jew and that the Messiah was coming through the Jewish line and we were God's chosen people and Jesus was our Messiah and He was our boss. And may I just say to you on this day in your house that it just hit me and I realized that I had it all wrong. He is Lord of all. He's Lord of everybody. He's not just Lord of the people who are like me. He didn't just come to set me free. He didn't just come to be my Messiah. He didn't just come to be the Messiah for the Israelites or this nation or that nation. He is Lord of all. But it wasn't till today, perhaps just now, that I understood not just the clean, not just the chosen, not just those like me. He's Lord of all. Not just, I'll see if I can read this, Baptometapentapalian saints of the Universal Church of the Latter Day Holiness Brethren like me. He's Lord of all. Peter carries on with the message of the gospel, but sometime during the message, verse 44 happened. I don't think I have it up there. Sometime during the message, the Holy Spirit just showed up. And people's hearts were challenged and changed. Can I just say to you, I don't know how this hits you. This is one of those hard passages. It's very quiet in here. I wish I could tell some jokes in the middle of this. I don't know how it hits you. In this one story, God has jarred Simon Peter's theology and moved him to the next level in his spiritual journey. Having been a religious man for his entire life, having followed Jesus as one of his closest disciples, having been the pastor of a large megachurch now for many years, several years, for the first time, Peter really understands. It's not about creed. It's not about color. It's not about denomination. It's not about tradition. It's not about how we've always done it. In his commentary, Chuck Swindoll titles this chapter, I think I've got that one there, Facing the Prejudice Syndrome. And he spells sin, S-I-N, drome, instead of S-Y-N. Not the prejudice syndrome, but the prejudice syndrome. Here's one quote from his commentary. Like a gardener must diligently pull weeds to stay ahead of infestation, we must seek out and eliminate every form of bigotry and chauvinism. Then he offers 3 principles about this prejudice syndrome. The first one is that the root of prejudice is pride. The second point he offers is that the rationalization for prejudice is tradition. That's how I've always done it. I thought that's the way it's supposed to be done. You're doing it different from me. You can't be right. I'm rationalized. This is how we've always done it. I don't know why you all do it that way. That can't be right. The rationalization for prejudice is tradition. And the third point, the rehabilitation from prejudice is painful. Yesterday I was sitting in my office studying, and one of the guys that was here mopping and vacuuming the church, he was mopping the church, and he'd mop a while, and he came back and he poked his head in my office. It's not hard to figure out who he is. There's not a whole lot of people mop here, but you can guess. I won't call his name. He sits right over there. Stepped his head, stepped in my office and poked his head, and he said, "You know, Clayton," he said, "I was just mopping the floor." And he said, "You know, it's really, really easy to mop and get clean the big main part of the hallway. It's easy to mop that and get it really good and clean." He said, "But you know, when you have to get over here into the crevices and dig a little bit with that mop head to try to clean it out," he said, "it's really kind of hard to do." And I said, "I might use that in the service tomorrow." Can I read verse 36 again? I think I've got it there. Proclaiming the good news of peace through Jesus Christ, because He is Lord of all. May I just remind you, I say it often, I hope you don't get tired of hearing of it, that our culture needs peace. If there's one thing that I would say characterizes, when you look at the news, the one thing that characterizes our world is unrest and lack of peace. Our world definitely needs peace, and I've said it over and over again. It didn't matter who became president of the United States, that person is not able to bring peace, because peace comes through Him. Peace comes through Jesus Christ. Our culture desperately needs the peace and the rest that comes through Jesus Christ. If Church 247 and every other church, all other 246 churches in Spartanburg County for that matter, are going to penetrate deep into the culture, it means the Lord is going to have to first do some cleaning of some deep places in Pastor Clayton's heart. Pull the weeds of prejudice and preconception and misconception as we, the Church of Jesus, continue to move in our journey. Because you know what? That's what the Lord expects of Clayton in his life. He expects Clayton to not stagnate, but to be mobile and to be moving in his journey. If we continue to move in our journey to the place where God desires us to be, I think it will be accompanied with the epiphany. Now I really understand. God doesn't show favorites. You know what it means? It means that I'll be more compassionate to those of a different race or a different socioeconomic status. It means I'll be less argumentative with my brethren from another denomination. It means that God will have to nudge His mop head a little deeper into the crevices of my heart. You know, Peter hasn't gotten to his message yet. He just said that one verse. He hasn't got there. I'm going to come back to that next week. He hasn't gotten to his message yet. He hasn't told the beautiful story of grace and hope and forgiveness and peace available through Jesus Christ to those people who were nothing like him. He couldn't. Not just yet. Peter was still moving from where he was to where God wanted him to be. But Jesus had asked Peter and the other disciples to be his witnesses and take his message to the uttermost parts of the earth, to the deep crevices, to the far places, to take his message. You're to be my witnesses to the uttermost parts of the earth, but to penetrate deep into the culture, to get to the remote places, to reach the unreached, not just in Swaziland or India, but to the deep places right here in Spartanburg County. I don't know where that hits you. Kind of hits me a similar place that it hit me last week whenever God told Peter, Peter, if I've called it clean, don't you call it unclean. I've asked you to go, and I've set you free. You know what you can do? You can go without a doubt. That was the second thing. The first thing that God told him, the Lord told Peter was, don't call it clean, and don't call it unclean if I've called it clean. The second one is go without a doubt. I'm setting you free. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about what the other disciples or the other apostles or the other people are going to say. I'm setting you free. You can go without a doubt. And when he got there, the third thing he realized is, now I really understand. I understand that God doesn't show favorites. Do you know what that means for Church 247? That means that if you came through the back door and you say, honestly, I'm that person. I just showed up, but I never seem to fit in church. I never seem to be exactly like them. Well, I'm just here to tell you that God doesn't show favorites. He's Lord of all. And wherever you're at, and whatever your background, and wherever you've been, and whatever sin has consumed your life for all of these years, I've got great news for you. He is Lord of all. I just asked you this morning, I'm going to be right here. I'm going to move this out of the way. We're going to play a song called Come to the Altar. Now imagine there's two groups of people here. Some of y'all like me who've been doing this thing for a very, very long time. And I thought I had it figured out and my theology was just right. And I look and say, God has just burdened my heart. Clayton, if you're really going to get it, if you're going to take my message to the uttermost parts of the earth, you're going to have to let my mop head get to some deep places in your heart. Because you've got some prejudice against some groups of people you've been hesitant to reach out and to minister to. And I've got to take you to the next level, Clayton. That's group one. Group number two, maybe you're here and you feel like I'm that guy. I'm that Gentile outcast that doesn't meet the standards. Well, I'm here to tell you what today. He's Lord of all, and you have met the standards. He said, whoever believes, confesses with your mouth, and believes in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead, you can be saved wherever you're at. Blake's going to sing this song for us this morning. It's titled, Come to the Altar. Will you just stand with me while he sings? I'll be glad to meet with you here. You know how low impact our little invitation time is. You can deal with God right where you're at. Man, He wants to take you to that next level. He's put people in your life, in your circle of influence. He's put people there and they are white at the harvest. He's put them in your life and they're different from you. But you know what you can do? You can go without a doubt. Because God doesn't show favoritism and He is Lord of all.
Are you Forgiveness was born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason to wait. Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes, a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness is born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, what a Savior! Isn't He wonderful? Sing hallelujah! Christ is risen. Bow down before Him, for He is Lord. Sing hallelujah! Christ is risen. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness is born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness is born with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Bear your cross as you wait for the crown. Tell the world of the treasure you found.
Father, I confess Father, I pray that you would make Church 247. God, I pray that you would make each person in this room. God, would you make us aware of those who are around us who are hurting. God, would you burden us and not let that burden rest until we understand that you're not showing favoritism. God, I pray that you would use our little church in this community, Father. Father, I pray that you would help us to go harvest the fields that you have gone before us. Father, you've gone before us and planted seeds, and you have watered and you have fertilized, and the fruit is ripe. God, would you give me, would you give every person in this room, Father, this week, Father, would you give us an opportunity to reach out and to harvest some of that ripe fruit. And then, God, would you give us the courage to take advantage of that opportunity. God, would you make us a hospital for those who are hurting. God, would you make us a haven for those who are different from us. God, when people walk in the doors of this place, I pray that they will see in an instant that we understand that you do not show favoritism. Would you start, Father, in my heart? We love you, Lord, and we thank you for your amazing grace. that you have extended to each of us, beginning with me. Would you release us, Father, with your presence and your blessing and your favor? And would you make us, Father, bright lights to shine in our dark world? We love you, Lord, and we thank you for moving us from where we are to where you want us to be. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Can I just make one announcement? You know, if you want to get connected, we're getting so big now, I can't remember people's names and who was here and who wasn't here. It's our little 2:47 a.m. groups that meet on, right now they meet on Sunday evenings. We'd love to have some groups on different days of the week. That's how you get connected, and we'd sure love to have you. If you haven't heard about them, you can come talk to myself or talk to Hope. She's got her hand up, thank you. And we'll tell you about how you can get connected. Hope you have a great afternoon. We love you. And remember that we're greatly blessed and highly favored. Have a great day.
Greatly blessed.